That day in the hospital, a child went missing. No one knew what had happened. Nurses checked rooms again and again. Security cameras flickered with shadows that didn't make sense. Panic rose in hushed tones. Calls crackled on radios. Footsteps echoed down long, sterile hallways. But one man moved quietly, unnoticed by everyone. He was the janitor people passed every single day without a second glance. What no one knew was that his past carried the kind of training you don't just learn, you survive. And that past was about to save a life. Welcome to the unspoken chapter. Before we begin this story of instinct, courage, and a hero hiding in plain sight, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button. The kid was 4 years old and impossibly small when he vanished. A swarm of small shoes and hurried voices pushed through the pediatric wing in the first frantic minutes, parents repeating names like litany, the fluorescent lights buzzing above as if they too were holding their breath. The nurses did what the protocols demanded: lockdown, checklists, sweep the common areas, confirm the last known caregivers. But procedures only papered over the real fear, and fear tastes like hot metallic air in a corridor. Cameras showed the corridor empty for 10 seconds. That mattered. A door left ajar, a tentative blur on the feed that could be anything. Security tagged footage, called radio, and ordered the main entrances to be sealed. A volunteer pressed his forehead to glass and mouthed the boy's name as though a window might breathe it back. In the middle of that controlled chaos, Earl pushed his mop bucket with the same steady rhythm he used every morning, the rubber wheels whispering across tile. His uniform read E. Collins. Everyone knew the face, but not the name behind it. The polite nod, the absent-minded shrug. Everyone thought they knew him. No one was right. When the alarm went off, he did not join the rush. He listened. The sound that made him put the mop down was not the alarm. It was a detail below the noise. A hitch in an HVAC vent. A faint chemical tang near a supply closet. A child's cough, caught and swallowed somewhere down in the guts of the building. He had been hearing the world like that long before the mop. A skill left over from a life that insisted on paying attention. He slid a gloved hand along the baseboard and felt a smear of damp that did not belong to the night's cleaning rotation. He knelt with the economy of motion of someone who had spent decades preserving energy for the moment that truly counted, and found a tiny scuff of bright blue paint, fresh, and a small smear of the same formula you find on the cheap plastic toys children clutch. Someone had moved through here with a child in their hands. Someone who did not belong here. By the time a nurse shouted that the child's last recorded position was near room 204, the grown-ups were all working off the same panic map: stairwells, exits, public waiting rooms. No one checked the service doors or the freight corridor, because those were where hospital ghosts went to die, closed to the public, ignored, forgotten by planners who never knew the building's every secret. Earl knew those secrets because he had to. He had lived his life navigating places where a wrong turn was a conversation you might die mid-sentence from. Decades ago, his hands had been steadier for arteries and engines and luckless strangers. Now they held a mop, but the map of his memory fit the lay of the hospital like a muscle remembering a long-ago rhythm. He moved through the building like smoke, through the places people never bothered to look, listening for the small things. A door that breathed differently, a floor tile that had the scuff of shoe rubber going the wrong direction, a smell of fried food, places near the service exit where delivery drivers sometimes loitered. He found, under a pallet of boxed linens, the torn end of a hospital bracelet snagged with Velcro. Someone had taken the boy, and in their haste, they had snagged a scrap of evidence on their way out. The bracelet had the hospital's logo and a partial timestamp. Its missing half told him the window was narrow, 7 minutes from the last surveillance ping to now. He moved faster, but still quiet, urgency without clumsiness. Outside, a delivery van idled in the service lane, engine ticking as it cooled. It was unremarkable, dented, white, advertising no company, windows taped with opaque cardboard. The CCTV outside the rear exit showed wheels, a smear of motion, then nothing, as the van eased down the alley and turned into the back roads people used to avoid the main intersections. Security ran to the lot, radios firing, but the van was already half a city away. Police would come. They would cordon, set traps, flood the routes with authority. Earl had minutes, maybe fewer. He knew the routes the van would take, the lanes that delivery men favored to avoid traffic cameras, the narrow cut between the warehouse and the old bus depot where junked forklifts shadowed the pavement. He was not going to wait for backup. He had spent entire stretches of his life learning to be the backup. He ducked through a maintenance gate he had used 30 years earlier, when he helped install a new boiler pipe, and remembered how, when you know where you are, the city is a book with pages you can flip through. He jogged silent, paws on feet, heading to the alley where the van had been last seen, eyes sharp for the small trace a child leaves. A smear of powdered milk, a bright plastic shape, an animation keychain caught on lip of a storm drain. The world narrowed until there were only footprints and breath and time. A lone shoe heel left an empty arc in damp asphalt. A small blue bead of plastic winked in the gutter. Someone had dropped a Band-Aid. The kidnapper had been in a hurry. That made him sloppy. Sloppy made mistakes. Mistakes left trails. The van had parked where the industrial district met the old rail yard, near a shuttered storefront that still bore the ghost paint of a sign from the 1980s. Two men stepped out, one wiry, one broad-shouldered, their jackets hooded, though it was mild. They moved with the tentative violence of people who had decided desperation was easier than planning. Behind them, a child sat in the rear, knees pulled to chest, eyes wide and damp, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one ear sewn on wrong. The men argued in clipped whispers, and Earl watched, hidden by a stack of pallets, weighing options, seeing the gaps in their caution. There was urgency in their hands, but not coordination, fear in their faces, but not fatal resolve. They were not professionals. They were criminals of convenience, and convenience seldom meant competence. Earl had no intention of letting the police take control of the moment. Police would bring lights and radio and the chance that a trigger-happy foot would make everything worse. He also knew his bones. He could not run like men half his age. He would not. He would outthink them. He listened to their cadence, predicted their blink, and when the broad-shouldered man unzipped a bag to brandish a phone, he saw his move as if it had been rehearsed. He moved before the phone touched the man's hand. The first strike was the sound of metal kissing bone, as Earl used a length of rusted pipe to knock the man's wrist sideways. The man's howl was swallowed by the train yard's distant rumble. The smaller man spun, surprised, reflexive, and Earl closed the distance with the quiet force of practice. His hands found the soft valley at the small of the arrestee's neck, thumb pressing. The second man hit the ground before he understood how he had been stopped. The child began to cry then, a small keening that cut through Earl's practiced calm and made the world align again. The fight was short and brutal and wholly disproportionate. Earl fought to disarm, to avoid harm. He used weight, angle, silence. He pinned one man against the van's wheel arch and held him there with an elbow into the ribs until the breath left the man's lungs in a ragged surrender. The other tried to run with a calf kick that would have put distance between them, but Earl had timed him and stepped into the path, and the man's leg caught a pallet, and he folded, face down among old flyers and soda wrappers. Earl did not break the men. He left them breathing and incapacitated, the way he treated himself long ago after salvage missions. Enough to keep them from rising, not enough to maim them. He cupped the boy's chin with the corner of his glove and said, "You're safe now." The boy answered with a small hiccup and a single ridiculous laugh that dissolved the tension like a popped bubble. Word traveled faster than the police report. By the time the hospital administrator walked over to insist on formal statements, someone had taken a photo. By the afternoon, a local journalist phoned asking for a comment. By evening, a veteran from a nearby unit appeared in the lobby, shoulders squared, as if delivering a salute without standing. They insisted Earl accept coffee and a blanket, and a handful of questions he ably dodged with the same economy he'd used in the yard. He was not a man in need of validation. He refused interviews on the spot. The crowd's gratitude was enough, and it became apparent that this was the kind of man who had been hiding in plain sight for years. That night, after the boy slept replete and safe under the watchful eye of new hospital security, and a mother who would not let him out of her sight, Earl walked the corridors one last time and paused at the small brass plaque someone had placed near the service elevator. For those who act when the world is not watching. He rested his palm on the cool metal and felt the ache of his knuckles, the old creak of cartilage, the slow burn of muscles that refused to forget. He had wanted nothing out of the day but the quiet certainty that one small life had been spared. Yet now, standing beneath the hum of hospital lights, he recognized that his silence had been a camouflage that allowed him to keep looking, to keep listening. The police arrived with a lights and siren ferocity that finally matched the magnitude of the moment, and Earl stepped back into the anonymity of a man with a mop as officers cuffed the two desperate thieves and lifted the boy into the arms of his mother, who sobbed against him like someone surfing the edge of a heart attack, and a miracle at once. Questions came in a flood. How did you find him? Did you see them? Did you get their plates? Too many paper questions for a man whose answers came from muscle and memory. He said nothing at first. He let the mother say thanks until the doctors took the boy to check for signs of trauma. He watched the scene with the quiet exhaustion of someone who had given himself to danger and found it had accepted him back, as if the years had merely been a long, necessary silence. Then an officer, younger than the boy he'd saved, stepped closer and asked the one question Earl always expected and never wanted to answer. "Do you have any ID, sir?" Earl's gloved hands were still slightly damp where the boy's tears had spattered. He reached into his front pocket and pulled out an old silver coin and a frayed patch that bore a faded emblem. No flashy medals. Only the ink of a unit and a small numeric tattoo on his forearm that glinted when he rolled his sleeve back. The officer's eyebrows rose like someone seeing a ghost. He knew the mark by reputation, even if he had never met a man who carried it. A murmured recognition moved through the crowd of hospital staff. Old unit badges, half-remembered names. A veteran's nod passed quietly from one to another. Respect did not erupt. It folded into the crowd and held them steady like a foundation. In the days that followed, the story followed him. Not like a tale, but like a shadow that other shadows acknowledged. People who had tapped him on the shoulder now stepped aside and called his name with an almost audible reverence. A little boy who had once been an anonymous bundle in his arms went to school the next week with a toy rabbit whose missing ear had been sewn back with a shaky stitch. The mother came by the supply room and slipped a handwritten note into Earl's cart. No fanfare, only the words, "You saved my son." He folded the paper and put it in his pocket next to the coin and the patch. He kept mopping. But the hospital was different. People watched the corners now, their eyes softer, their steps less hurried. A plaque went up officially, small and modest, installed by staff more inevitable than ceremonial. "In gratitude to the quiet ones among us." Veterans came by sometimes and left a challenge coin on the counter. A young nurse hung a tiny blue ribbon on the mop bucket at the end of his shift. The world noticed. It did not shout. It only held him in a way he could see. Earl never asked for recognition, and he never truly received it in any way that would satisfy a man who had lived by higher standards. But for the boy who slept each night with the rabbit, for the mother whose palms no longer trembled as much, for the hospital staff who paused to remember, that the people they passed every morning might be carrying a lifetime of unread chapters. The rescue lived in them. It mattered. It was enough. And in a quiet moment, the coin warm in his pocket, Earl walked out into the city and let the night close behind him like a ready hand, ready for whatever came next, knowing there would always be corners to check, small sounds to hear, and a tired world that sometimes, just sometimes, needed the kind of man who did not seek the light to find the way. This story is dedicated to the silent heroes whose courage goes unseen. If this tale moved you, subscribe to The Unspoken Chapter, like the video, and hit the bell so you don't miss future episodes. Drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from, and if you know a silent hero in your life, share their story so we can honor them too. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.